a few things. First of all, it is great to be here. We live for a little break. A few things before I start. One is that this is a really hard room to speak in front of. So can you guys all come to the center right here?
Sure.
Okay, this is going to be a little harder than I thought. The second thing is that I have some of my Microsoft colleagues here. So if I say something that isn't true, they'll raise their hand and be like a filter for you to make sure that I'm giving you the real scoop. And third, I thought I should come clean, given what's going on right now in our country, and tell you that I am a registered Republican, and I think and act like a Democrat. So there you go. So I was thinking about the presentation, and I thought that we should have some kind of democratic process to kick it off. So I'm not sure if this ever has been done before at a recruiting event like this, and I think the guys in Kennedy would probably think hard maybe about asking me back if this doesn't work. But so I'm gonna, you know those TV shows and movies where they have different endings and you get to decide what the ending is? So let's do that with this presentation. So I'll give you 3 choices for presentations and you can decide on which one we do. So ready? Okay, choice 1 is I can take the next 45 minutes or 50 minutes and tell you all about Microsoft's vast array of products and services. That's choice 1. Choice 2 is I can go back and dig out 2 or 3 examples of our recruiting process and go through them in excruciating detail so you'll know exactly what we did and how we did it. That's choice 2. Or choice 3 is I can sort of give you my point of view on where I think recruiting is going and some ideas, some of which we tried, some we haven't, about how we can help the businesses in ways that I think they are looking for. So that's choice 3. Do you have a little voting button on your table? No? Okay, all right, so we'll do it the old-fashioned way. Raise your hand for choice 1. Okay. Raise your hand for choice 2. Okay, there's one there. We'll take that offline. And raise your hand for choice 3. Excellent, because that's the presentation I presented. All right. So that is what we're going to do. And in order to start, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk for a few minutes about recruiting at Microsoft. So Microsoft has 72,000 people or so as of the last month. And what I can tell you is that it is a huge deal. So I've been in my role now for about 9 or 10 months. And prior to that, I ran HR for MSN and for their server business. I must get triple the amount of mail that I did from people with suggestions and ideas on how to improve recruiting or why their experiences can somehow reflects what everyone is going through. And it is just sort of an extraordinarily important thing to our company. So I made a list. We're very data-oriented, so I thought I'd give you a few pieces of data just to show you how big it is at Microsoft. Let's see, we grew our workforce last year that was just over 60,000 at the beginning of the year by 15%. So that is huge growth off a big base. We hired over 15,000 people last year in 91 countries around the world. 91 countries. Including over 1,000 people in India and China, and I think we hired 2 people in Trinidad and Tobago. We hired over 2,000 people from college campuses around the world last year. We scrambled to find housing for 1,200 interns last summer in Seattle, and space at the Bill Gates barbecue during the summer. We gave out 6,000 wanna grab a bite. Get it? Bite, B-Y-T-E. Okay? Want to grab a bite t-shirts on campus. We flew more than 1 million airline miles to hire people last year. And my 2 favorite is that we hired college students who together wrote 4 million lines of code while at school, which represents 8% of the code used to develop Vista, our new operating system. Very interesting. And of course, we consumed 21,324 slices of pizza during the 12-week internship season. So it just gives you sort of give you a flavor of how big a deal it actually is at Microsoft. In terms of investment, there's a lot of ways to look at it. I'll just tell you that we've got 600 or so people that do recruiting around the world. And that doesn't include partnerships that we have and all of the sort of outsourced relationships. Those are people that recruit Microsoft employees that are recruited for us around the world. And the last thing here is industry leadership. So a lot of those emails are external, and people come to us and they want to benchmark us, and they want to know what we're doing, and they want to understand our processes. And it's very interesting because these guys have heard me talk about this, that externally, I think the Microsoft is viewed in a lot of ways as sort of the gold standard. And they feel like we know what we're doing and we have our processes group. It doesn't feel that way internally. And they will tell you, it doesn't feel that way. And one of the reasons, I think, is this bottom part, and it's why recruiting is important at Microsoft. So why do we take it so seriously, and why is it such a big investment? And it's kind of the obvious stuff that you would think, which is that we are a company that lives or dies off our people. It's all about the IQ of our employees. Basically, talent wins in the IT industry. And in a way, if you sort of think about this like a math equation, that the difference between good and great recruiting has a dramatic impact on our business. So in other companies that I've worked for, it always has an impact, but in some industries, some companies, the slope of the curve is really steep. So going from good to great is really important for us. And therefore, I think we have this really high bar. And having a high bar, even if you're doing it well and have done it well for a long time, as a lot of you know, sometimes it feels like there's this gap and that it's hard to close it. And so I think that is one of the reasons that kind of there's this difference between how people perceive us externally and sometimes how it feels internally. Which is part of my job, is to make sure that our team has confidence and feels good about what we're doing, as well as aspirational about where we can go. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I am going to give you some ideas on what, in my opinion, recruiting to win looks like. Some of these, what I will do is I will go through each of these. I'll talk about the concept, and then where we are. I have examples from Microsoft or other companies. I'll share those with you. I will tell you that this is not the sort of silver bullet approach that you can say, oh, great, I got these 5 things. Yep, we're going to take our organization from where we are, and it's going to be great. These are sort of my opinion after 9 and 10 months in this job, and also being responsible for recruiting in other roles, on things that I see that there are sort of opportunities that align with where the business needs us to go, and what I actually think our capabilities are. Talked about commitment, talked a little bit about talent strategy. CVP stands for Candidate Value Proposition, which is sort of like employment branding stuff. Know the market, and then lastly, know the business. All right. Okay. So I was going to leave this slide off. So I was going to start with talent strategy because I like talent strategy and because I think it's really important. But one of the things that I've learned is that, actually 2 things. One is that I've had responsibility for HR a number of times, and I really think that I underestimated the complexity of recruiting. Just talking about this with a colleague from Starbucks, until I got in the job. And that one of the things that has become very clear is that great HR starts with great recruiting. And if recruiting isn't going well in our company, let me just tell you, leaders have no patience for talking about anything else. The second thing is that in a lot of ways, HR or recruiting sort of requires a strong foundation and sort of a strong commitment. And so I didn't want to sort of start with the things that I think are where we can go until I recognize or acknowledge that there is this foundational piece that I think you have to have. And without this, no matter how smart you are, no matter how sort of great your organization is, about some of the other things I'm going to talk about, I don't think that you can get to where you want to go. So I call this commitment. The first part of it is about leadership commitment. And it's one of the things that I think that Microsoft clearly has. It's almost part of our DNA. And that there was an article, a Forbes article a little while ago on up-and-coming leaders in different industries, and one of the leaders, or there were a few from Microsoft that were named, and there was a quote about what Microsoft's core competency is, and I think it was either Steve Ballmer or Bill Gates said, our core competency is not software development, it's recruiting. So Steve Ballmer actually was probably the first person to run recruiting at Microsoft. Challenges for all those other recruiting leaders to come after him. But it's just sort of an indication of just how important it is to the company. And I think that leadership buy-in and that sort of headset around recruiting is incredibly important. I will tell you that even at Microsoft, to this last point here about philosophy and execution aren't always in sync, is that I run across leaders all the time that sort of conceptually they believe it, and yet you see things around recruiting where they're not providing the support, they're not, voting with the resources or with their time commitment in the way that we think they should. So even in a company where I think it's part of the DNA like Microsoft, you need to reinforce that with your recruiters, with your HR leaders, and with senior leaders who are reinforcing it with their teams. And that's something that's just an ongoing process. It's just the way it works. Okay, systems, tools, and processes. So we can spend the rest of the day talking about applicant tracking systems and what the market is for them and sort of how they integrate or don't with your career site and other talent and HR systems. I will admit that it is, first of all, I'm not an expert. I will say that it's probably the thing that I have spent more time on as a percent of my time in this job, and it's just because it is so important. And that, in a way, I think that things like systems, tools, processes, and the way that those support your organization culturally and the things that you think are important, that's I see recruiting in a lot of ways as kind of art and science. And that this is the science part, and it's the part that you've got to get the machine to work well. Keep working on productivity and efficiency of recruiting, and that this is an incredibly important piece of that. What else do I want to say about this? I guess the only other thing is that I do think that systems and tools and processes are the selection of them and decisions around how you're going to invest are things that are best shared broadly across HR. And that, I see us make decisions all the times on the system things that we're doing, and then we put it in place, and it's got this great sort of capability, and let's say I'm on the talent management side, or I'm on the recruiting side, and then we kind of get 18 months into the execution and say, boy, I wish that system thing integrated with this thing so that we could share data, and that we had a more holistic way of looking at our talent. So it's just something that I've learned over the last 9 or 10 months, and as we're looking at systems and tools going forward, I just think it's important to keep in mind. Okay. So now we are moving on from the foundation. And the second thing that I want to talk about is the notion of talent strategy, and really what I should say is talent acquisition strategy, or shopping list. So raise your hand if you have a recruiting plan for your business. Just raise your hand. You have a recruiting plan? Okay, we should, if you don't. I have seen lots of recruiting plans, and typically, I won't ask you to tell me, typically the form of those recruiting plans is an Excel spreadsheet. And so I get the spreadsheet, and it tells me the number of people I'm going to hire, and sometimes there's sort of summary statistics, how many, in what country, at what level, what roles, and it is, while it's important, it's not enough. And I'm a big fan of Excel, but there is this sort of whole level of thinking about talent that needs to go behind those. And in some cases, it's actually there. You just don't see it get exposed in a talent acquisition plan or a staffing plan. And in other cases, it actually isn't there at all. So here is one way to think about it. So the concept is all hires aren't created equal. So I went, quick story, we have a mid-year review, so HR gets reviewed just like all of our businesses do. And we were going through our review last year, the HR review with Steve Ballmer, and I was lucky and got to go first. So I'd been in the staffing job for, I don't know, 8 weeks or so, and I had to go and talk to our CEO about staffing across the company. And so, I showed him all of our numbers that halfway through the year, and we had an absolute blowout year last year in terms of the number of people we hired. And I'm going down and highlight, all the highlights. And so he looks at me and classic CEO question. It's like, okay, Scott, I see the numbers. Well, tell me about the quality of hire. So I think for me. And the first thing I say is, well, that's a good point, Steve. I don't really have a systematic way to measure quality of hire. But anecdotally, what I can tell you is I don't hear a ton of noise, and we should do that, but I don't hear a ton of noise in the system. So I don't hear managers saying, geez, we're not able to get the quality of person in the pipeline, and the hires I'm getting are really not capable of doing the work. And I also, the data that I do have around attrition, so we look at good and bad attrition, people that we want to leave and people that we don't want to leave. I don't see a lot of attrition in the first 12 months on the job that tells me that we made a bad hiring decision. I said, but I do think that there is a huge opportunity that we may be missing there. And the issue is, it is not just how good is the person that we put in the job. The issue is, did we hire for the right job? And what is the opportunity cost of not hiring for the right job? And so this sort of notion, I started thinking about this, about all hires are not created equal. There was a Harvard Business Review article back in November of 2005, and the title of the article was A Players or A Positions. So you can probably find this. It is a fascinating article. And basically what it says is that no matter how hard you try, no matter how good your recruiting team, you will not be able to hire A players in every single position. So that, of course, would be like heresy at Microsoft. They say, well, I'm going to apply for every position. And that may be a good aspiration, but the reality is you probably won't be able to do that. And so what this article was saying, sort of the premise was, it's our job to figure out what are the most important positions to hire those A players in. And so where would you start for that? Where you start is, well, what is your business trying to achieve? And what is the talent required to do it? So I also was, before working at running HR for Amazon.com, I was a former consultant. So my consulting head created this little 2x2 matrix, which all consultants do. And this is one way to just very simply think about talent acquisition strategy, which is is upstream from the spreadsheets that you see often with a talent acquisition plan. So on one axis you have volume, right? So there's don't hire a lot, hire a lot. And then on the vertical axis is how important it is to the business. And you're not going to hire people that are jobs that are unimportant, but there's some relative scale. You can say, okay, these are important but not critical, and as you move up, they become incredibly important to the business. And if you think about what is the business doing, what do they need to do, what does the growth look like, or what is the objectives of the business over the short and long term, and then you sort of translate that and say, okay, well, what talent pools do I need to be successful? You can actually plot those talent pools very simply on a matrix like this, right? So you can say, okay, well, I got a group of people that are incredibly important to hire, top left box, but I don't need very many of them. But man, if I hired them, they would change the game. And not only would you be able to sort of visually see, well, what does that look like, but you'd probably behave differently when it comes to recruiting against that talent pool. So for those, you might be interested in breaking your comp bank. And you might say, whatever it takes to get them, that's what I'm going to pay. And if I have to mess with internal equity, okay, I will. Those also might be the positions where you send an email to Bill Gates or Steve Ballmer and say, hey, can you call this candidate for me? Because they're incredibly important and we have to hire them. That might be a very different approach than you would take with this talent pool that exists in the, on the right side of this this 2x2, where maybe you have to hire, in order to enter a business, in order to build it out to scale, you got to hire 50 or 100 test engineers or something, and you actually won't be able to deliver on your commitments without doing it. But you're going to have a very different approach to the way that you think about comp. You may actually not have some of your best recruiters working on it. You may outsource it. And it's just sort of a whole different approach to that talent pool, given the fact that it is important but not critical to creating some way sort of competitive advantage. Okay? So, example from Microsoft. And this was a year and a half or so ago when I was running HR for MSN. So MSN, as you might know, has a search engine. How many of you have used the MSN search engine? Okay, it's just as good as Google. Just check it out. So we're a aggressive number 3 competitor. So there's Google and Yahoo and us, and we're trying hard. And one of the things that we were thinking about when we were building this search business and knew that we wanted to compete with these formidable competitors who have huge market share, like Google and Yahoo, is, well, what talent do we need? And so, the very first thing, and these are, smart, senior businesses, we need engineers, we need, software developers that can really come in and deliver on this, and Scott, we're going to need hundreds of them. Like, okay. That's going to be a challenge, but fine, we're going to need hundreds of them. And we started to talk about it, and we started to talk about, well, is there a specific flavor of engineer that we need? Like, is every engineer the same? Or do we just need 100 engineers this quarter and another 100 the next quarter? And, we started sort of talking through what is the business trying to do. And what we quickly got to is, what we're trying to do is we're trying to build a smart search engine. So smart search engine is when you type in, I want to find this, or you have to type in a question, it tells you. And what you realize is that that algorithmic search engine is, the better it answers your questions, the better it does at mining data. That's what makes it better. And guess what? There are engineers that are really good at data mining. And engineers that are really good at data mining are really good at building search engines. And in fact, all engineers are not created equal. And so you could take something like that and say, not only do I need to hire 100 engineers, and I'm going to hire them over this time period at this level, but there's also this sweet spot that is called data mining that is in this top left-hand box, and I'm going to put half my recruiting team on them, and I'm going to partner with my compensation person to let them know that we may do things dramatically different for that talent pool versus another. And so if you sort of take that and step back to, well, what does my talent acquisition plan look like? That is the kind of thinking and kind of translation of, well, what does the business need, to what are the talent pools, to how do I go out and recruit, that I think we're capable of delivering. And that's the stuff that I think needs that to be behind that Excel spreadsheet that has the number of people that we're going to hire. Okay? All right. That's number 2. All right, candidate value proposition. Candidate value proposition. So first of all, this is another topic, just like systems, that you could spend the whole day on. And I am also not an expert on candidate value proposition in any way. But I have, despite the fact that Microsoft is so invested in recruiting, and that we've got processes that have been in place for a long time, and I think we do them relatively well, maybe good but not great. We are a company that I think has let the market define our employment brand and our candidate value proposition for us. And it's really interesting, but in a way we've sort of said, well, we have a corporate brand. Everybody knows who Microsoft is, and no matter where I go in the world, if I'm in Bangalore, in India, or in Shanghai, or wherever, everybody has an opinion on Microsoft as a company. And in a way, I think we've kind of let that, good or bad, that we've let that be our employment brand, or we just assumed that it was. And that those things need to be connected. So you can't have a corporate brand that is completely disconnected and different from your employment brand, but they're not the same thing. And so we've done a lot of work over the last 6 or 7 months to sort of step back in a classic marketing way. We're going to do marketing research. We're going to talk to people. We're going to talk to different segments of candidates, people that have just joined us, people that have been with us for a while, people that have said yes and they haven't started yet, people that we tried to hire and said no, people that turned down our offer to even interview, to try to understand, well, what do they think about Microsoft and are we able to tell our story? So my point about do you have one is it really isn't whether you have one. The question is it the one that you've created or is it the one that has been created for you? And at Microsoft, I would say, for the most part, we have one that has been created for us. So the other thing that we have spent a lot of time on, and again, it's sort of classic marketing, is when you think about employment brand, there is a tremendous, especially for a big company, there is a lot of power in the notion of segmentation, right? So raise your hand if you have a company that segments its customer base in some way. Different products or services to those customers. Yeah, I mean, most companies, I don't know, you may or may not be aware, but most companies have big marketing teams and they're thinking about segmentation because you're selling to broad